Good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Just a couple minutes here until we get to 10 a.m. For now, hope you're all having a great day so far and studying well and preparing for your other tests. Just a couple minutes to go. Hi, good morning, Cordy. Hey, Sydney. Hey. Zoe, welcome back.
It's kind of sad.
Oh, what? Oh, the last day? A little bit, I guess, huh? Yeah, it always is. But to be fair, it's pretty exciting too, It's nice to just get to the summer after a long semester. But yeah, I always miss the students. At the same time, though, you guys are still going to be around, and we'll probably actually see each other more in the fall with campus reopening, Hi, Kylie, Sebastian, everybody there. Welcome. Brandon.
How come there's no knowledge questions on this?
Knowledge questions? Oh, yeah.
Not that it needs to be.
Oh, yeah, it's an error, man. Well, let me think. What questions would I have asked about it? Descartes' method of doubt, temporal parts, grandfather paradox. Yikes. Pasting it from a different document, I think I didn't add the questions in. That's something to think about. Okay, hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you guys for being here. Glad to see you guys. Let me just quickly look at one thing that I'm now been called to my attention. Okay, so yeah. Okay, guys, let me say something really fast. There's just a little quick couple of questions that were intended to be included on this study guide, and I don't think that it's right to not include because it's such an important topic of the course. It has to do with Gettier. So right now, while we're all together, I'm going to quickly forward you guys a couple of these questions. So 1 second while I do that. Let me maybe think about something here, because if I'm going to add these questions, I think to sort of preserve the number, then maybe I'll take a few off or something so that kind of makes it even. There were some questions about the work of Edmund Gettier, everybody, that I clearly did intend to provide. So I'm just going to send them to the class right now, and then we'll talk about maybe eliminating a few questions from the list. Okay. Yeah, one last thing here. Okay. So, hey everybody. Hey there. Welcome. Hey Olga.
It's good to hear without
Sorry
that,
guys.
sorry.
1 second. Yeah.
I needed some sleep.
That's good. That's another question.
You don't have to go max in order to, I'm so going to. It's the bold statement.
Yeah, okay. So, hey guys, sorry for the little delay. Thank you so much. Hey, can anybody confirm for me right now that you've received this quick Canvas announcement that contains those 4 questions on the Gettier? I provided those right there. Just let me know if it came in. Anybody here? Kylie? Okay, so you don't still have it.
Study by questions on Getty.
Yes.
Yeah, I have mine here.
You see it there? It's just now arrived. Okay, I just now mailed it, so you'll just see it now. I think, Kylie, if you go and look into our Canvas announcements, those are just 4 study guide questions that I did mean to include, and I don't know how it managed to escape my notice. But I guess since those are questions now added, let me go ahead and let's start perhaps with those in our review. Yeah.
Should we just add them to the bottom?
Yeah, you can add them to the bottom. And here's the thing. Let me ask you guys this before going a little further. If I was to say remove a couple of study guide questions, which ones do you think would be best? I don't want to remove all of the same questions from one section. So if we could kind of bounce around a little bit and just take a couple off, because I don't want to burden you with too many additional questions, and I'd like to keep the numbers similar to what we have. Maybe I could just take off 1 or 2 if you think they're like really kind of just off or just hard to answer, but we don't have to make this determination now. I think it'd maybe be better to use our class time to just do the review. But I'll look into it and I'll try and delete a few maybe tough questions later. Okay, guys, so let's look at these. When is the final? Thanks, Lane. So our final exam is Wednesday, the 19th. So 5 days from today. It's from 10:45 a.m. to 1:15 p.m. I'm going to be finished grading the papers that you guys submitted last Friday over the weekend. Definitely no later than the end of the weekend, probably by the end of the day tomorrow. And then I'll send a Canvas announcement to the class just to notify everybody that the grades are in, and you can simply email me for your score, your comments, and for anything else in the whole class. So just that's a little piece of information I wanted to let you know, that I'll be done with the papers tonight or tomorrow, latest Sunday morning. But either way, they'll be done this weekend, and then you can check on your grades. And then, of course, yes, the final lane, it's Wednesday, 10:45 a.m. to 1:15 p.m. Just as we did before with the midterm, you're going to receive the document as a Canvas announcement sent to you, and you'll have the 2.5-hour window to complete the answers. With the midterm, you had to answer 6 out of 10. For the final, it's going to be a little bit more, but not too much more. I'm going to have you answer 8 questions instead of 6, but you have a lot of extra time. So the ratio of time to questions is much better than the midterm still. And I'll give you a sample of like 11 or 12 questions to choose from to report on 8. Yes?
And I'm asking for like a rough estimate. Do you think we will need those full 2 hours?
Oh, most times, usually not. But at the same time, I don't like to issue like a strict guidance on it, because some students like to use the maximum time just to kind of keep their notes with them until they really made all the final decisions about what they want to write. So no, but to be honest, most people usually would finish a test like this in 90 minutes or less. Um, but feel free to use all the time if you want or need to. You know. Okay. So everybody that did notice the couple of additional questions that I mailed out. Yeah. Anyway, here they are. Explain Socrates' example of the statues of Daedalus. What is that example? Yes.
So the statues of, I don't know how to say Daedalus.
Uh-huh.
He was a sculptor, an
Mm-hmm.
ancient sculptor, and his statues were said to be so realistic
Mm-hmm.
that if they weren't tethered down, they would get up and run away.
Right, that's correct. And so, go ahead, more.
When using this to talk about knowledge, Socrates tells
Meno.
Say Milo.
Yeah.
Tells Meno that an opinion is not knowledge unless it has something to be tethered to. Knowledge
Right.
is like tethered to the fact that I saw this happen, therefore it's knowledge.
Good, right.
I hope I explained that.
That's pretty much right. Let me add just a few ways of adding some detail there. So yeah, in the discussion between Socrates and Meno, Socrates says, Meno, why is knowledge valued more than just getting a correct opinion? And a correct opinion, just by the way, is having a true belief with no justification for it. So why is it better to have knowledge than to have just a mere correct opinion? Now, this example is supposed to show why knowledge is better and why it's more valuable. It's kind of like how the statues of Daedalus are more valuable when there's a rope on it than when there's no rope. Okay, so when you have these statues, they're beautiful works of art, but the rumor was that they would run away if they were not literally tied down by some ropes. Now, the ropes are supposed to be a metaphor or a symbol of justification. And the statue is supposed to be a symbol of a true belief without justification. So when you add the justification to the true belief, it locks it down and it doesn't go anywhere. Just like when you add the ropes to the statue, it won't go away. And as you guys are reviewing for the final and stuff, I've been thinking a lot about this point of Getier's this whole week, because when students ask questions about like study guide questions and things, you can tell when they really know that because they have read it and they remember the information. It stays in the mind because you have all the reasons in mind. But when you're just trying to sort of guess what the answer is based off of things that you did not read, so you didn't actually take in all the evidence, it's harder to remember, isn't it? It's harder to remember stuff when you're cramming at the end and you didn't actually like take in all the facts at the beginning. So facts and evidence, justification, it kind of creates a grounding to the true beliefs and opinions that you have and make sure that they don't leave your mind or that you forget them. So you retain information when it's based on something, just like you retain the statue when it's literally based in the ground with ropes. So it's a metaphor. And when you don't have evidence, you're just guessing when you get things right. And guesses, you don't remember the guess. But when you answer a question correctly because you have detailed knowledge based on evidence, it's not something that you're likely to forget or to change your mind about. So justified true beliefs are more stable and likelier to last in your mind than correct opinions that have no evidence behind them. That's why you should try to get evidence to support your correct beliefs instead of just guessing, because you won't remember these guesses. Just like you should try to get ropes for your statue of Daedalus so that the statue won't run away. Okay? Now, another question about Gettier after that was the classical account of knowledge. What was it, the classical account? It was a set of 3 conditions, which we've kind of mentioned here just now. Someone can tell me what the classical definition of knowledge is from ancient Greece that we stuck with for thousands of years until randomly 1963 and Gettier. So, yes, justified true belief. Now, any discussion of this account of knowledge, the classical one, would require you to maybe say a word or two about each point, like what is truth, what is belief, what is justification. And then you could add why each one is needed and they're not enough unless you have them all. So like you might give examples in which a subject has just satisfied 2 out of the 3 or whatever, or maybe 1 out of the 3, but not all of them. And in such a case, the person wouldn't have knowledge. Did you have a question?
No, I was just going to answer it.
Yeah. So justified true belief, that's the classical Greek definition of knowledge. And as we just said, to the Greeks, justification is key because it upgrades something from just being a correct opinion to actually being knowledge. And that's when it becomes more stable and more rooted in your beliefs and in your memories. So, yeah, truth, when what a proposition says matches the facts of reality, like the fact that I'm wearing a mask right now is true. Belief, when a person thinks that something is true, like, I don't know, if you believe that a certain person committed a crime and you're one of the jurors, then you could say, I think that that's the correct fact, and I think that's what happened, even though not every juror perhaps would agree. And then justification is just having evidence for the belief. If you are the juror and you believe in the guilt of the defendant, then it's probably because of the detailed evidence provided in court that's trying to make the case towards guilt. Or if you're one of the jurors that doesn't believe that the defendant is guilty, then maybe you think that the evidence doesn't indicate that. But anyway, when you have a belief and it actually is correct, and you really do have evidence, then that's what you would have knowledge according to Greek thought. But if even one condition is off, then it's not knowledge. So if you really have a justified belief that you're talking to a man on the internet, but it's actually a woman who's catfishing you, then that's not knowledge. You don't know it's a man because it's not. But you'd have a justified belief in that if they were really going to all these lengths to kind of produce misleading evidence of their gender identity. And if you had a belief that was true, but you had no reason to think so, then that would not be knowledge either. Like if I just sit here right now and I'm guessing that there's aliens somewhere in the universe, you can't really say I know this. I'm just sort of speculating. But knowledge would happen if I had real evidence to prove it. Okay. So anyway, that's the thing about justified true belief. Another question that was listed in that little section is, how does Gettier show that a justified true belief is not sufficient for knowledge? And I think you guys know this. So there's a case, an example given by Gettier to make the point. And do you remember that little example? He says, well, first of all, he says it's possible to have a justified false belief. Also, he gives us the closure principle, which says that if you have justification to believe one thing, then you're also going to have justification to believe something that is entailed by it. And then we get the example. Okay, so Olga, you just say the man with the coins.
I mean, the story.
Yeah, generally speaking, right? There's more we can say in depth. Okay, so we'd walk through this whole scenario if this question was selected. You got to say, first of all, okay, look, so suppose that there's two guys interviewing for a job, competing for the job, Smith and Jones. Smith ends up believing that Jones will get the job and that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Why does Smith believe that? Because, someone tell me, why does Smith think that Jones is getting it and that Jones has 10 coins?
Because the boss told Smith that Jones is getting the job.
Yes, Smith was told by the boss, I'm going to hire Jones. But separate from that also, what about the coins?
He said that the man who has 10 coins.
No. Stop right there. Nobody told him the man who has 10 coins gets the job. He figures that out on his own from two separate experiences. One experience was just hearing from the boss, I'm going to hire Jones. The boss doesn't say anything about coins. The boss just tells Smith, I'm hiring Jones. Separate from that, what does Smith do with Jones? Counts the coins in Jones' pocket. Key point, okay? So like some people, it's lost on them. They say, Smith thinks that the man that gets the coins is going to have the job because the boss told him that. No. The boss just tells Smith, I'm hiring Jones. Why would the boss care about coins? The boss the job hiring decision has nothing to do with the coins. It just so happens that Jones is the man who Smith thinks will get the job. And independently of that, he has counted the coins in Jones' pocket. Smith has. So Smith puts two and two together and he's like, boss says he's getting job. Separate and unrelated to that, I counted that he has 10 coins. So now I'm going forward with the belief that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. You see? Okay, so he forms the belief that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket based on those two pieces of evidence, and that's justified to believe. He's justified to believe this because the boss told him and because he counted those coins. Then there's the plot twist. So what's the whole plot twist thing at the end?
Smith gets the job.
Smith is given the job. Surprise, not Jones. And by sheer coincidence, it does happen that what? And Smith also has 10 coins in his pocket, which he did not know of, which he was not aware of. So if we look at his belief then, the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. It turned out to be true, but not for the reason Smith thought. Smith thought it would be true because of Jones getting it and Jones having 10 coins. In fact, it came to be true because Smith himself got it and had 10 coins, which he was not aware of. So what Gettier's final analysis is that in this situation, we have a person with a justified true belief that has not got knowledge. It's a justified true belief without knowledge, because even though it's justified true and believed, it's just a matter of sheer coincidence that it is true, given the way that Smith formed his belief in it. The evidence he has is a mismatch from the factors that make the proposition true. It's true because of Jones. Smith thought it would be true because of, it's true because of Smith, and Smith thought it would be true because of Jones. So it's justified true belief, but it's just luck and coincidence that made it true. And Gettier would argue, and most people agree, that when you have knowledge, you don't arrive at knowledge through just dumb luck or coincidence. And that's why this is not a case of knowledge. Shows us that the justified true belief definition is not complete, because if it was, then every time somebody had a justified true belief, it would amount to knowledge. Okay? Yeah, I was thinking of another case. I mean, I think of these cases all the time. Why not? Because it's part of my job. But say that somebody saw like a toy gun on a table, and they thought it was real because it looks realistic. So they're like, whoa, there's a gun on that table. But what they saw was not a gun, but nonetheless, in a box, like a wooden box on the same table, which they don't see inside of, there is a gun inside of it. So would that person have a justified true belief that there's a gun on the table? Yes. They believe there's a gun on the table. There is. And they had a reason to believe it, but they didn't really know it, you see, because they weren't looking at the real gun. They were looking at the decoy. So in that case, it's a justified true belief that's not generated in the right way to be knowledge. And it's cases like these that are Gettier cases. But anyway, Gettier's own example is the man with the coins thing. Yes?
Well, we need to know the other story about Brown, who's
Brown in Barcelona. No, you don't have to, but if you're comfortable reporting on it and you think you can say about it, then that'd be fine too. Like just any Gettier case would be fine. The classical one is Smith and Jones pretty much, but like the coins thing. But there is Gettier case too. And then there are these other variations on it that have popped up in the literature, as well as the ones that I'm just like freestyling here, like the gun on the table thing. So yeah, justified true belief is not knowledge because of cases like those. And then one more thing was, what does it mean for a proposition to entail another one? That's, I think, a pretty straightforward point. But what is it? For one proposition to entail another, what does entailment mean? If A entails B, what does this mean?
If A is true, B must also be true.
Yes, correct. Can anybody say, so here was the answer, and maybe you type it in. So when A entails B, that means that if A is true, B must also be true by logical implication. Can you produce an example of two sentences where the first one does entail the second one? So if A is true, it guarantees that B is true. That's good, Sydney, yes. Maybe an example will help to back it up and make it even more clear. So suppose we have a statement A, and it's true, so it entails something B. Dr. Village is a college professor, which entails that he graduated high school. Sure, it's not possible to be in this position of a professor with no high school diploma or degree. So obviously, since I am a professor, that does entail that I graduated high school. It's true that I'm a professor, and so that guarantees that it's true that I had to graduate high school. Not the other way around, though. Notice that graduating high school does not entail that you'll be a professor, because you could do anything else. But given that you're a professor, certainly you had to have graduated high school. So that's an entailment right there. I was thinking about the virus, maybe if something would work with that. Like, I've been vaccinated, so that entails that, I don't know, I'm not at great risk of getting the virus, but it's not exactly a clean example because there's probability involved. And some people, I guess, can very, very rare cases get it afterwards. Maybe if a person gets the coronavirus, that entails that they were exposed to the coronavirus, right? Because if it's true that you had it, it can't be false that you were exposed to it. So entailment is just logic. If A implies is another synonym for it. If A implies B, then the truth of A serves to guarantee the truth of B. And that's how people reason deductively. It's like you see a footprint at the crime scene, and you're like, well, if this is true that this is here, so that implies that somebody was at this scene. Because if there's a footprint, it cannot be false that there was a person walking. So, entailment is how we reason logically, but it was involved in the Gettier case because the closure principle says that if you're justified in believing one thing and it entails another, then you will also be justified in believing that second thing because it follows from the first. So, like, I guess if you're justified in believing that someone had coronavirus, then you would also be justified in believing that they were exposed to it at some point before that, because the second thing is implied by the first. Yes.
Could you repeat your definition for closure principle? I want to make sure.
Yes, the closure principle says that if a person is justified in believing a proposition, and that proposition entails another one, then the person will also be justified in believing that second other one based off of the first. Okay, so like I told you guys I was born in the 80s, and that's just true. And so if you think about it mathematically, and then you're like, well, it entails that he's at least 20 or 30, you know, so let's say 30 because that's true. If he was born in the 80s, he must be at least 30. Your justification for the first thing will carry right over to the second. It's not like, oh, I'm justified in believing he was born in the 80s, but I'm not justified in believing he's older than 30. That doesn't make sense. So whatever evidence you have for one thing will also be evidence for something separate from it that is implied by it. Okay? So like I know that you're a Chapman student. Here's to make it relatable to you because you're here in my class. So I'm justified in that belief. And if I think about it, I'm like, well, if she's a student at Chapman, she must have graduated high school. So I'm entailing from the first thing to the second, and now I'm also justified in the second because it just follows from the first. Okay. Okay, good. So thanks, guys. I wanted to take a moment to go over those missing study guide questions on Gettier. Sorry I didn't have them in the beginning. And when I announce for everybody the additional questions that I'm going to delete, I'll probably send that off with the notice about the finished essay too. But as I look at the study guide, you know, there's a couple questions on there that I thought were sort of not the best ones, and those are ones that I might be able to throw out. So let me quickly scan here. Okay, so in the Plato stuff, I thought there's like a redundant question. It's me criticizing myself, I guess. But what makes a human life go as well as possible? And then his analogy between the soul and the state, they're really very similar questions, those two. So I think I could delete one of them and it wouldn't really change much. So I probably will take off, maybe I'll just take off what makes a human life go as well as possible according to Plato, because if you describe the analogy between the soul and the state, you're going to have to say that anyway. So question 76, maybe I'll take that one off, okay? Number 75, that's another one that I thought was kind of a weak question. Explain Turing's views on whether machines can think. I mean, the answer is basically...
Your numbers are like off now. Yeah, that's...
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Thank you. Let me correct my prior statement right here about the numbers that I would change, because I was looking at a different list. So to the correct numbering, about human life going as well as possible according to Plato, that is 72. Are we right? Okay, so 72 is the one that I was just trying to reference, where it asks, what makes a human life go as well as possible according to Plato? I think that question is not needed because it's really very similar to 73, which says describe Plato's analogy between the soul and the state. So I'll take off 72, okay? And then 71, right before it, explain Turing's views on whether machines can think. To me, that question is not the greatest because the answer is basically yes when they pass the Turing test. There's not much more a person can say about it. So we can take 71 off of there. Yeah?
Would you say that's because it's similar to number 68, describing imitation?
Yes, it is.
So
When you describe the imitation game, you're basically going to say that when they pass that, then that's when he thinks they can have consciousness. So
yeah, I'm going to move those.
68 and 71 are so similar. 68 is the better version of that question. So 71 and 2 are two questions that I will remove. Okay. And looking up a bit. Interpretation and truth question. That one's also pretty weak. It's just like one asks, what does it mean? The other asks, is it true? So I'm thinking 62 is another one to take off. Okay. So right now, at this point, I'm saying we're going to remove 62, 71, and 72 from the list to make room for these other four questions. And I think that's sufficient right now. Okay. So taking those three off. But anyway, continue with your questions, guys. I don't want to hog up the time. With the study guide that you're looking at, I hope you can guide us through any other questions on the list that you think maybe we can speak on with the remaining half of the period here. Okay, Olga, 65. 65 says, explain the concept of a nomological dangler, right? Okay. So what's a nomological dangler? That's something that just has a set definition. Okay, and I'll get to that too, Kylie. Thank you. What is a nomological dangler, though?
Something that can't be explained by science.
Don't say can't, but hasn't yet. Yeah, so something that is as yet unexplained by science and physics. Correct, Kylie. Something that remains unexplained by physical sciences or science in general. Yeah. Okay, so J.J.C. Smart brought up this point, and he's the author of Sensations and Brain Processes, which argues that physicalism is true because all your conscious states are just brain states, and that means they're physical states of a physical object. But in making this claim that sensations are brain processes, he's standing against dualism, which says that consciousness is not a brain process, but instead it is this outcome of the mind, which is not a physical object, but is instead this non-physical, non-extended thing that can think, like a ghost or a soul. Now, if that was true, if dualism was true, then J.J.C. Smart is saying that consciousness would be a nomological dangler, because assume that consciousness is like a ghost, then it's not something scientifically observable and testable. And that would mean that it's completely outside the realm of anything science could explain. And so science in general does not like nomological danglers, does not say, let's try and get as many things that we can't explain as possible. No, instead science tries to increasingly explain more and more, and eventually they hope everything according to physical and scientific principles. So if consciousness was a nomological dangler like the dualist thinks, that would run contrary to, the parsimonious intuitions of like a scientific person. So he thinks that consciousness is not a nomological dangler, it's just a brain state, and then he sets out to try and convince us of that throughout the rest of his essay. But when he starts off, he says, consciousness, thought, it's just a brain process, and if it wasn't, it'd be this weird, mysterious thing that could not be explained. Those are called nomological danglers. But don't worry, because there's no good reason for you to think consciousness is a nomological dangler. He thinks that it's much more reasonable and plausible to say that it's a brain process, and he tries to defeat any objections to that claim. Okay, so in essence, nomological dangler is something that's not yet explained by science. Question for J.J.C. Smart is consciousness one of those? As he would say, no. But dualists think yes, and his goal in the paper is to just defeat the dualist objections. Okay, now Kylie, you ask about a man may know nothing about brain processes. So that's also from J.J.C. Smart's article. Explain the objection that a man may know nothing, a reply rather to the objection that a man may know nothing about brain processes. So let me get to the question on the list so I see it here. Oh yeah, so first of all, the objection itself was the point that, well, can you explain the objection? The objection that a man may know nothing about brain processes? Let's see if anyone can say the objection first, which is related to question 66 also. And then after that, we can say something about how he replies to it. So in objecting to physicalism or the claim that sensations are brain processes, a person might raise this point. And what is the point in more full detail when somebody says a man may know nothing about brain processes? Okay, so Kylie, any ordinary person can easily talk about their sensations, but they don't know and cannot say what is happening in their brain. Therefore, the two things must not be the same. Correct, yes. And so how does he react to that point? In what way does he try to overcome this objection, which according to it, they could not be the same because people talk about them differently and they don't even know how to talk about the brain features or activities? What's his response given? It involves a reference to a example, something about a morning and evening star. I guess I could tell you that, but maybe you can put those pieces together and tell me what you think is the right way of responding here. Just because two things are da 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 da, you can tell me the rest. Okay, so Sydney, just because there are two different words or labels for something in language does not mean that they have to refer to two different things. Correct. And what example was given to make this point or to make it even clearer? Morning and evening star. Okay, so as seen in the example of the morning and the evening star. With the morning and the evening star, a long time ago, people, that woke up in the early morning, they would see a star shining and they thought it was the brightest one, so they called it the morning star. And in the evening sky, when the stars were out, there was one that shines brightest, and they called it the evening star. People thought they were different stars, and they talked about them differently. But it was discovered later that they're actually the same star. Well, they're actually the planet Venus. But anyway, that they're the same thing. And so what that shows, according to JJC Smart, is that even if there's two different ways of talking about something or labels given to it, they still may refer to the same object. He also gives a case of lightning and electricity. Okay, some people might not know what electricity is. And certainly there was a whole time period in history where nobody knew what electricity was. So imagine a person looks at lightning and they can't talk about electricity or like the discharge of ions in the atmosphere. Does that mean that lightning is not electricity because we can only talk about the big bright thing in the sky, but we can't say what electricity is in every case? No, it is electricity, just described differently and less formally, less scientifically as quote unquote lightning. So just because we have two separate words, lightning and electricity, doesn't mean that there's two separate things. Lightning is electricity. Just because we have two separate words, morning and evening star, does not mean there's two separate objects. There's just one thing. It's the planet Venus. And so just because we have words like fun and then another word like neural activity in the hippocampus, they can still refer to the same thing, even though they're not talked about and they don't necessarily in language appear to be the same thing. So your sensations just are brain processes, and don't be thrown off by the fact that it sounds different when you talk about them. As an example, consider these morning, evening star, lightning, electricity cases. Okay, good. So let me hear another thing, whatever you want to do next. We have enough time to do another couple good questions, probably. At least a few more. 85, all right. And then Sydney will try to get to this, time moving. 85, a historical account of misfortune, right? Okay, so Thomas Nagel, the paper Death, or Fun. Yeah, there you go. Exactly, Cordy. It's kind of a funny way of putting it, but that's, I guess, what JJC Smart's committed to, that fun is just the brain state that the person happens to be in at that time. We feel it as fun, but it's just a brain process. Okay, so then what was it, 85, about the historical account of misfortune. Thomas Nagel wrote the paper Death. That was our last paper we studied. And his overall position is that if death is really the end and there's no consciousness after that, if it's just done, then that's bad because you would lose all the goods of life. And he knows that some people would not agree with him because some people look at it like this: if you're not there anymore and you don't exist, then how could that be bad? Because there's no person to like be suffering or experiencing any kind of loss or disappointment if you just don't exist. But Nagel stands his ground and he says, no, it's still bad even if the person doesn't exist because of the basic fact that they've lost something, the goods of life that they used to experience. Now that they don't exist, they can't experience them anymore. The historical account of misfortune is supposed to back that up. So what it says is that some things that are unfortunate, some misfortunes, can only be seen as such when you compare a person's previous state to their current state. Okay, so take the state of non-existence, like a person has died. It might seem like, how can that be a misfortune because they're not there? So there's no person to be upset or disappointed or whatever. But he says it's still a loss, though, because you can compare their prior condition of existing and enjoying all the basic goods of life, whether that's desire, activity, thought, or whatever, and then the fact that they just don't exist now and they can't experience those goods of life. So it's like the before and the after. This is what shows us that it's a misfortune. The historical account of misfortune says to compare a person's prior state with their present state. And if you see a loss or a degradation, then we would say that's a misfortune, even if they're not aware of it. Here's another example maybe that could help. Suppose that I say someone has $1 million in their account on the 31st of this year, so like right up at the end of this year. Is that good fortune or is that a misfortune? Don't answer too quickly. You hear $1 million and you might be like, that's pretty good. But it does depend, doesn't it, on what they were like before. So if this person had $5 on January 1st, they've really come up big, and that was a huge year, so that's great fortune. But if they had $1 billion on the first of the year, and now they're down to the last million, then they've lost 99% of their wealth, and they would look at that as like their worst financial year, perhaps, a very bad year, misfortune. So the one and the same amount could be good fortune or misfortune. It depends on what we compare it with in the past. And so in the same sense, when somebody doesn't exist, if they used to exist, that's a loss. If they've never been born yet, like they haven't even been conceived, then there's nothing to compare it with in the past, so that's not a loss. And that also, I think, would help you with question about prenatal non-existence versus death. It is similar to 84, yes, because he says death is a misfortune, not prenatal non-existence, since death is a period of non-existence that follows having existed, whereas not having existed in, let's say, 1980, in our case, is a time where there's nothing to compare it with because the being hasn't been there yet. So that's why he again claims that death is a misfortune in a way that not existing in the past before you were born is not, because in the future this will be a loss. But prior to having been conceived, there's nothing to lose yet. Okay. So like I have not had any kids yet, and those yet to be unconceived children are not suffering right now because they don't exist. But if I had kids and then they stopped existing, now that would be a bad thing. So that's why he says to those that claim non-existence isn't so bad because we already went through it before we were ever born. It's not really a correct point, he says, because non-existence after one lived can be and is compared with the fact of having had the goods of life. And that's why it's such a tragedy. I mean, you all know that. If someone dies, it's sad, right? Because if they're gone and there's nothing left, then there's no way they could experience any further enjoyments or goods of life. So it's like a contrast thing. The loss of those goods is what makes it bad. Even though the person's not able to be aware of it or to feel the loss, it's just a fact that there's something that's not there that used to be there. So that's what he thinks is the bad thing about it. Okay. What else? If you want, we can get into something else.
Did we do
48.
48?
48, sorry, yeah. So let me get to that. Thank you. Yes, time moving. Why is it a paradox? So why? Ted Sider said that everyday people say of time that it's moving. Hasn't time really been flying this semester? Look, we're at the end. But according to Sider, it doesn't make any sense to say it's moving. Why not? It's just a paradox. It's like a logical contradiction or something to say it moves. Why though? What is it about motion that ties us up in circles when we're trying to say time is a thing that's in motion?
Because time is needed to define motion.
Yeah, time is needed to define motion. Just focus on that thought right there. Time is needed to define the concept of motion. For a thing to move, it has to be in different places at different times. Movement is just displacement over time. Okay, so like while your fingers are moving and typing, it's because they're like in different little spaces at the different like milliseconds of the clock passing. And if they just stayed frozen in one place for the rest of all time, then that would not be motion, would it? So motion is when things are changing positions relative to time. Therefore, if time moves, it would mean that time is in different places at different times. And exactly, Cordy, that leads us to an infinite regress, because if time is moving with reference to some second order type of time, then it would seem that that sort of time has to also be placed in a linear ordering according to a tertiary sort of time sequence. And this just leads us on and on to an infinite regress. So if time moves because it's moving through time and it's at different places at different times, we're using the concept itself to define how it moves. And that's not going to work. And so in the comments here, motion means being in different places at different times. Yes. Because the definition of motion includes the concept of time. Yes. Replace time with motion. Time means being at different places at different times. What is the first order of time that the second order is moving in reference to? Well, rather, what is the second order time that the first order time is moving with reference to? An angel, for time to be at different places at different times does not make sense. Yes. So that's right. And what's the solution according to Sider? To just give up and say there's no movement at all. All the moments exist. The past, present, and future are all real. It's not that this present moment is the only real thing. This present moment that you're in right now has always existed. and it will always exist. It's not going anywhere. Isn't that weird? Anyway, okay, what's next? Still, what, 8 or 7.5 minutes, pretty much? So we can get into the next. 70. Okay, Turing's response to the idea that a machine can only mimic conscious behavior, but it doesn't actually have any feelings or sensations. This is the objection from consciousness that Turing mentioned in his paper. And so that's the question that we can ask. How does Turing respond to that idea? That a machine could only mimic the behavior of a conscious being, but it doesn't actually have any real feelings or sensations when it does this mimicry. What is his reaction back to that? Does this, in his view, defeat his claim that machines could have consciousness? He doesn't think it defeats it. Why not? It's kind of one of these things of like, well, I don't know, I don't want to say too much. How does he try to push back against the sense that a machine doesn't have actual thoughts or feelings, no matter what answers it seems to give?
The only way to determine whether anything has consciousness is to observe its behavior.
Right, yeah. So how do you know I'm conscious? I mean, you're not me. So it's not like you can feel my feelings. You can feel yours, okay. But who else's can you feel? Nobody. Everybody else aside from yourself is a third person relative to you. So if you're looking to get the first person point of view on the computer, this is not going to happen. But by the way, you're not going to get the first person view on anybody besides yourself. And therefore, it's not even a fair criteria to say that you don't think something has consciousness unless you could actually be the machine having the feelings from the inside is ridiculous. And so he thinks that unless you're actually a skeptic about whether human beings have consciousness, then you already must agree that observable behavior is the only possible standard to judge by. And so when a machine produces indistinguishable conversational answers, then the behavior matches human behavior, and we should just say it's conscious because that's the way conscious humans act. Okay? I mean, it is a weird debate. I think about that because, suppose that robotics, artificial intelligence becomes like the next big revolution in human technology, and suppose that by the turn of this century, we are looking at robots that it's hard to, they have realistic conversations with you. Maybe they even talk to you about their deep thoughts and feelings. Now, you're, a person born in the early part of the 21st century. At that later time, you might be older, and they'll look at you as old-fashioned. Do you think you're going to be telling your kids and grandkids, those things don't have real consciousness? They're just faking it. You can tell they're just machines. Or would you be kind of thinking like Turing? Like, they want to hang out with me and, like, go to concerts and movies and just talk about them? Am I interacting with, like, just a machine that doesn't have thoughts? Anyway, Turing says you'll never know what they're thinking inside, but when they behave that way, that's the only possible observational criteria that you could use. And to those of us that are committed to saying that's not consciousness, then I guess we'll never respect these robots. Anyway, let's keep going. What's next? I'm just riffing off of my own thoughts because I think it's interesting. But anyway, what's next?
I just have a question about that.
Yeah.
So, like, when it says the only way is to observe its behavior, so that means, like, internally?
No, observable is not internal. What do you mean?
Right, that's why I'm confused.
Well, what are you talking about? Internal? No, it's the whole opposite of the point. You can only, internal perspective on your own consciousness is the only one you have an internal point of view on. That's obvious, right? I mean, you're you, but you're not me or anybody else.
Okay,
So
I get
for
it.
everybody else, you have to just look at them to determine if they're thinking.
And since that's all we can see from the machine, we just have to.
So it's the same thing with the machine as with other people. That's all he's saying. Yeah. Okay. And so what next?
Do we have enough time for 84?
Okay, and I see Brandon's question too. Difference between physicalism, idealism. 84. Death is misfortune, but not prenatal non-existence. Why can't we kind of talk about it though? Like, so if you die, then it's after you've lived. But like, you have not had kids, so those non-conceived children of you, there's no misfortune there because they haven't existed yet.
I hate to interrupt you, but I think I said the wrong one. I'm talking about explain Nigel's example of the infant and brain.
Okay, yeah, okay. Infant and brain injured man. Brandon, I'm going to try to get to your question if I can with the last minute or something, but I have this one that was just posed to me in the class sort of simultaneously. So about the infant and brain injured man. Say that a person like me gets a head injury today, and then I'm like an infant after that. So goo goo gaga, feed me. I can't use the bathroom without help. Like, so I'm fully taken care of like a baby, right? But at the same time, I don't remember my life before that. It was such a heavy injury that it's wiped out my memory. It's like I wake up from that injury as a baby, cognitively. You know what I mean? Now, is that a misfortune? Nagel says yes. It is a misfortune, even though the person might not even know what happened to them, right? So I could be like content, like a little baby is content when you're taking good care of it. But just because I don't notice what happened to me and I can't understand that I've lost anything, it's still a loss. Just when you compare the fact that I used to have full cognitive function to where I'm at now acting like a baby. Now, an actual baby that is in that same mental state, that's not a misfortune because it's not a loss from what it had before. Okay, so once again, he's trying to make this point that the same exact state can be good, bad, or middle, depending on what we compare it with in the past. And so being infantile is not a problem when you're an actual infant and we don't look at your past seeing that you used to have more full cognitive function. But for an able-bodied adult to be reduced back to that is a misfortune. So now with death, non-existence. Non-existence, is it bad? Depends. Non-existence after you've lived is bad because you've lost the life. But non-existence before anyone's ever even been conceived, like before the sexual act that creates the fetus has ever happened, there's no person yet that we can say they've lost something. And so the non-existence back then, like you not existing in 1980, that was not a misfortune. But if you don't exist in 2080, that will be. You understand?
With this same logic, like from Nagel's perspective, would that mean that the death of an infant is not as misfortunate as the death of an adult?
No. It is. It's totally just as bad because it's the loss of all the goods of life that the infant is experiencing. But you make an interesting point because the infant might not have any attachment yet to these things because it doesn't really understand them.
Like at the day of life.
Yeah, well, based just on his own essay and his reasoning, I do think he would still say it's a misfortune because once something exists, it's enjoying the goods of life. And even if like a baby's not like fully cognitive yet, we assume that they're attached to those goods of life. Like they want to survive, they want to like see, they want to feel, they want to think, they want to have activities. So he says death is the same misfortune at any age, whether you're 100 years old or 5 years old, because people are always attached to these goods of life throughout their whole existence. And so being deprived of them would be the ultimate loss. Yeah. So guys, we've reached the end. It's 10:50, so I'm gonna have to let us go. But I really appreciate all your hard work, and it's been a tough semester and year, obviously, with the pandemic, but it's been a good experience, I think, at least in our class, getting to know some things about philosophy, and it's been a lot of fun working with you guys. So I hope you all do well on your other finals too, and you have a nice summer. In the fall, when we're all back on campus, maybe I'll see some of you guys around. But in the meantime, I'm going to be done with your essays in this weekend, and I'll be notifying you through Canvas when they're ready. And just make sure that you're ready on Wednesday at 10:45 a.m. to receive the exam, and then we'll get your test in, and you'll be good to go. For now, though, let's see that you're all right, and I'll close this stream, and then I'll be in touch as we get ready for the final. Okay, thanks, Cordy, and thanks everybody else. You've now been a part of the long historical tradition, the study of philosophy, something that goes back thousands of years that will endure on for thousands of years beyond. There's a lot of subjects that you can study in school that are not as ancient as philosophy. If you're studying psychology, that's relatively recent. If you're studying, certain fields in STEM, some of those things are pretty recent too. But philosophy is really deeply rooted in the human condition, and it's a pleasure for me to be able to teach this to you. So have a good one, guys, and let me know if you need anything. But in the meantime, I'll see you over the week. Well, I'll talk to you over the weekend on Canvas, okay, about your upcoming final and about your essays. So thanks again, everyone. Have a good one. I'll be in touch. Bye.